My name is Mara Ellison, and on Christmas Eve of 2024, at exactly 6:40 p.m., the people who had refused to come when my daughter was in the hospital stood on my front porch holding gifts. My mother had a poinsettia, wrapped in gold foil. My father stood half a step behind her, with his hands buried in the pockets of the same gray coat he wore to church every December. Beside them were my ex-husband, Cole, and his wife, Taryn, both dressed too carefully for a visit they claimed was spontaneous. Taryn held a glossy red gift bag with tissue paper puffed up like a performance. Cole kept glancing past my shoulder, trying to see into the house, trying to find the boys before he had earned the right to say their names again. Behind me, through the warm light of the living room, June was curled on the couch under her cardinal blanket, thin but alive, watching Silas and Bennett argue over where to hang the last ornament. Harriet was in my kitchen stirring cocoa. Nina had dropped off a pie 20 minutes earlier. The house smelled like cinnamon, melted butter, and the kind of peace you don't get by accident. My mother smiled with wet eyes, the kind she could summon when witnesses might be nearby. Mara, she said softly, we've all been doing a lot of thinking. A year before, when June was in cardiac ICU 74 miles away, I had called that same woman and asked her for one night. Not money, not a miracle, just one adult in my house so my sons would not wake up alone. She had said, "You built this life, Mara. Don't make it our emergency." Now she was on my porch calling it family. I stepped outside, pulled the door closed behind me, and made sure my children heard nothing. Before that Christmas Eve porch, there had been a quieter life. Not an easy one, but one I knew how to manage. In September of 2023, I was 36 years old, living in a small rental on the edge of Franklin, Tennessee, where the back fence leaned after every storm, and the kitchen light hummed when the house got too quiet. I worked from that kitchen table as a medical billing advocate, which meant I spent most of my days reading denial letters for people who were already too tired to fight. I filed appeals. I argued with insurance representatives. I translated hospital bills into plain English for families who had learned, the hard way, that getting sick in America came with paperwork sharp enough to cut you. I was good at the job because I understood fear when it arrived in an envelope. There was always a number at the bottom. Sometimes $3,800. Sometimes $18,000. Sometimes so much higher that people stopped asking how they would pay and started asking what they could sell first. I knew the sound of silence after I explained a balance. I knew the small pause before someone said, "So, what happens if I can't?" My children grew up around that work. June did homework at the far end of the table and drew red cardinals in the margins of her worksheets because she said they looked like tiny fires with wings. Silas, 7 years old, took apart toy cars to see what made them move. Bennett, 5, dragged a blue blanket from room to room until one corner turned gray, no matter how many times I washed it. We were not polished. We were scheduled. Dinner was whatever could be cooked in 20 minutes. Laundry ran after midnight. Permission slips lived under a magnet on the fridge. Bills were paid in the order of who would punish me fastest. Rent, electricity, groceries, then everything else. Cole's child support came late often enough that I stopped counting it until it landed. When it did, I treated it like extra oxygen, not a promise. He had married Taryn 8 months after our divorce was final. Online, they looked soft-lit and peaceful, the kind of couple who used words like blessed under porch photos. In real life, Cole saw the kids when it did not interrupt anything else. He liked fatherhood best when someone could take a picture of it. People called me strong. I used to thank them. By that fall, I had started to understand that strong was sometimes just what people called you when they wanted permission not to help. Still, I thought we were holding. June was laughing again. Silas was building a cardboard robot in the hallway. Bennett had finally stopped asking why Daddy's house had a crib but not a bed for him. I thought the ground under us was steady. I did not know it had already begun to move. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 78% right now, right? If that's true, type 1. If not, Type 2. Let's see whether I got it right. All right. Enough talking. Let's begin the story. By December, the cheaper rental had pulled us farther from Nashville, out past Lawrenceburg, where the roads went dark early, and every errand had to be planned like a small expedition. That was where we were living on Monday afternoon, the 18th of December 2023, when the ground under us finally moved. June was at school, singing in the Christmas program rehearsal under paper snowflakes, taped to the auditorium wall. I was at the kitchen table, on hold with Blue Cross, trying to reopen a denied echocardiogram claim for a retired mechanic in Murfreesboro, when my phone buzzed with the school's number. I almost let it go to voicemail, because the hold music had already eaten 40 minutes of my morning. Then it buzzed again, and some part of me knew. The nurse said June had fainted. Her voice was calm but not casual. I could hear adults moving behind her, chairs scraping, someone saying my daughter's name too softly. June had been born with a heart defect we had spent years monitoring, so fainting was never just fainting. When I reached the school, she was sitting behind the stage curtain with a paper cup of water between both hands. Her lips were pale, but she tried to smile because she was 10, and 10-year-old girls would rather be embarrassed than frightened. I just got dizzy, she said. I wanted that to be true so badly that for a second, I let myself believe it. The local ER did not. They ran tests, then more tests, and the room changed shape around us. Nurses stopped using bright voices. A doctor stepped into the hall to make a call. Words began collecting in the air. Valve pressure, transfer, surgical evaluation, pediatric cardiac unit. By evening, June was being sent to Nashville. That was when the mother math began. June needed me beside her. Silas and Bennett needed me at home. The hospital was 74 miles away, and every round trip meant gas I had not budgeted for, time I did not have, and 2 little boys who still needed dinner, pajamas, school bags, and somebody in the house after dark. Emergency sitters were quoting $22 an hour because it was Christmas week. I had $612 in checking, rent due before New Year's, and an insurance denial for $18,940 sitting in my inbox with the words pending review, as if that made it softer. I sat in the parking garage with my coat still on, and stared at the numbers until they blurred. There was no version of the plan where I was enough. So I opened my contacts, swallowed what pride I had left, and scrolled to the one name I had spent my whole adult life avoiding. Mom. I did not press the call button right away. I sat in the parking garage beneath the Nashville hospital with Mom's name glowing on the screen, my thumb hovering over it like the phone itself could burn me. The concrete around me held the cold. Somewhere below, a car alarm chirped twice and went quiet. Upstairs, in the cardiac unit, my daughter was being moved into a room where every adult seemed to know exactly what to do except me. At 7:36 p.m., I called Elaine Mercer. She answered on the 4th ring, breathless but not worried. I could hear music in the background, a bright Christmas song playing too loudly, and the clink of dishes. For one foolish second, the sound of a normal house nearly undid me. "Mara," she said, "is this quick? We're just sitting down." I closed my eyes. "Mom, June is being transferred to the cardiac unit. It's her heart. They're talking about surgery." There was a pause, but not the kind that means fear has entered the room. It was the pause of someone rearranging inconvenience into language. "How serious is serious?" she asked. "Serious enough that they won't let me take her home." Another pause. Then, "Well, what do you need?" I had practiced the sentence in my head, made it small enough to say, "I need someone at the house with Silas and Bennett. Just tonight if that's all you can do. I can drive back before school. I'm not asking for money. I just need them not to wake up alone." Behind her, my father's voice murmured something. "Stanley." Then the television got quieter. He was there. He knew. My mother sighed, and I knew that sigh. It had raised me more than her hands ever had. "Mara, Christmas week is impossible," she said. "We have choir rehearsal tomorrow, and the church luncheon Thursday. Your father and I already committed to the basket delivery." "Mom?" I said, pressing my palm flat against the steering wheel. "June is in cardiac ICU. And I understand that," she said, in a tone that meant she did not. "But emergencies can't keep becoming everyone else's responsibility because you refuse to build a stable life." "I built the most stable life I could." Her breath sharpened. "You built this life, Mara. Don't make it our emergency." I waited for my father to take the phone, to say my name, to clear his throat and become the man I had once pretended he was. He didn't. I said, "Okay," because there was no smaller word left. Then I hung up and walked back upstairs to my child. I walked back into the cardiac unit, with my phone still warm in my hand, carrying my mother's sentence like something heavy I had been ordered not to drop. June was asleep by then, or pretending to be. The room was dim except for the green numbers on the monitor and the thin line of light under the door. Someone had left a folded blanket on the chair beside her bed. I sat down, pulled it over my lap, and tried to match my breathing to the soft, mechanical rhythm around us. For a while I did nothing. I watched her chest rise. I listened to nurses pass in the hallway. I told myself one refusal was not the whole answer. Maybe my mother had panicked. Maybe my father would call, once he was alone. Maybe someone else in the family would understand what she had chosen not to understand. Hope can be humiliating that way. It keeps getting up, after it has already been knocked down. The next morning, while June was taken for another scan, I stood beside a vending machine with a paper cup of coffee and opened the family group chat. My mother had named it Mercer Family Blessings years earlier, back when she still liked the sound of us as a unit. I typed carefully, because begging has its own grammar. I wrote that June was in the pediatric cardiac unit in Nashville, that I needed someone with Silas and Bennett for even one night, even a few hours. Anything that would keep them from being alone while their sister was being tested for surgery. I stared at the message before sending it. Then I watched delivered appear beneath it. By noon, it had changed to read by Elaine, Stanley, Aunt Rochelle, and Uncle Martin. No one answered. Not my aunt, who posted every November about gratitude. Not my cousin 2 towns over with a guest room she called wasted space. Not my father, who had heard my voice the night before, and still knew how to use a phone when he wanted to. The silence was not empty. It had fingerprints. That afternoon, in the cafeteria, I opened Facebook because exhaustion makes you touch things you already know will hurt. My mother's face was the first thing on my screen. She stood in the church fellowship hall beside rows of Christmas baskets wrapped in red cellophane. 34 of them, I counted, because counting gave me something to do besides break. Her caption said, "Family means showing up when people need you most." There were hearts under it. "Bless you, Elaine. Such a servant's heart." She had posted it less than an hour after reading my message. That was when I understood. My family knew how to show up. They just knew how to choose who was worth the trip. After that, I stood in the cafeteria until my coffee went cold, then did the one thing left that made sense and still felt impossible. I called Cole, not because I trusted him, and not because he had ever been steady when things got difficult. I called because June was his daughter too, and there are facts biology does not let a man decorate his way out of. His phone rang long enough that I thought it would go to voicemail. Then Taryn answered. "Cole's phone," she said, bright and careful. "It's Mara." A small pause followed. Not surprise, calculation. I kept my voice even. I told her June was in the pediatric cardiac unit. I told her the doctors were discussing surgery. I told her I needed Cole to take Silas and Bennett for a night or two, or come to Nashville, or do anything that resembled being their father. I was not asking for comfort. I was asking for logistics, children, beds, breakfast. A grown man, remembering he had more than one household attached to his name. Behind Taryn, I heard a baby fussing, and someone moving dishes around. Their baby had a nursery in that house. My boys still had overnight bags there that rarely got unpacked. "That sounds stressful," she said. I waited. Then she lowered her voice, as if kindness had arrived when it had not. "Mara, my parents are staying with us through New Year's. The baby's been up all night. We can't bring all that hospital chaos into the house right now. All that hospital chaos is his daughter, I said. She made a small sound, almost a laugh. Maybe if you had a real job, you wouldn't always need everyone rescuing you. The sentence was so neat it took a second to hurt. Taryn, I said. Put Cole on the phone. There was muffling, voices shifting. Then Cole came on, already tired. Mara, he said, now's not a good time for us. For us. I remember that more than anything. Us had become a locked room, and his 3 older children were standing outside it. I ended the call before I begged. I did not know then that her sentence would survive without me trying to save it. 10 minutes later, Taryn called my work line and left a message, probably meaning to sound reasonable, not realizing the voicemail system transcribed everything. She repeated enough. When I returned to June's room, her eyes were open. Is Dad coming? She asked. I took her hand carefully, avoiding the IV tape. Not tonight, baby, I said. She looked toward the window and nodded like she was old enough to understand what no child should have to. 2 nights later, on December 21, June's surgery was still scheduled for morning, but the night before it did not behave like a night that understood schedules. Her numbers shifted after dinner. Not dramatically at first, not in a way anyone explained to me with alarm, but nurses began coming in more often. A doctor I had not met before stood at the foot of the bed and read the screen too quietly. June kept saying she was cold, then hot, then tired, in a voice that did not sound like hers. Every time her eyes closed, I watched her face for proof she was only sleeping. At 9:42, my phone buzzed with a message from the sitter I had paid for with money I did not have. Bennett was crying and would not settle. Silas had a fever. She could not stay past 11 because her own mother needed the car. For a moment, I simply stared at the words. June was in front of me. My boys were 74 miles away. I had already learned how far blood could stand from need, but need kept forcing me to test the distance again. I called Elaine. No answer. I called Stanley directly. It rang until voicemail. I texted Cole. 1 sentence, because I did not trust myself with more. Silas is sick. Bennett is scared. And June's surgery is tomorrow. I need help tonight. His reply came 7 minutes later. Can't. Taryn's family dinner. I looked at that sentence until it stopped looking like English. Then I called Harriet Voss. Harriet lived 2 doors down from me, 72 years old, widowed. With silver hair she pinned up every morning whether she planned to leave the house or not. She had once brought us soup after a stomach bug and stayed to fix the loose hinge on my pantry door because, as she said, a woman should not have to listen to a cabinet complain. She answered on the first ring. I barely got the words out. Before I finished, she said, I'm putting on shoes. 40 minutes later, the sitter texted me a photo. Harriet stood in my kitchen, wearing a raincoat over her nightgown, holding a thermos of cocoa in one hand and my spare key in the other. Silas was wrapped in a blanket at the table. Bennett was pressed against her side like he had known her all his life. That was the first time that week I cried. Not loudly, not even for long, just enough that I had to leave June's room and sit beneath the vending machine near the elevators with my yellow legal pad open on my knees. I wrote everything down. Times, calls, messages, the exact words people used when they left us alone. Nina Caldwell found me there at 3:18 inches the morning. She did not ask why I was writing. She set a sandwich beside my notebook and said, write it down while your hands still remember the night. By morning, the hospital had gone quiet, in the way hospitals go quiet before something important, not peaceful, focused. Nurses moved with softer shoes. Doctors spoke in lower voices. June watched all of them from her bed with eyes too old for her face, and one hand wrapped around the little red cardinal I had bought from the gift shop because it was the only thing there that looked like her. Before they took her back, she asked if Silas still had a fever. I told her Harriet had it handled. She asked if Bennett cried. I told her only a little, which was a mercy-shaped lie. And she nodded like she had expected to be consulted. Even then, even scared, she was still trying to manage the rest of us. The surgery lasted long enough for time to lose its edges. I sat in the waiting room with my legal pad open, but for once I did not write much. There are moments too large for sentences when you are inside them. I wrote her name once, then again. Then I pressed the pencil so hard the tip broke. Nina found me around noon and sat beside me for 3 minutes without saying anything. That was one of the kindest things anyone did. She did not tell me to be positive. She did not promise what she could not know. She just sat there, shoulder close to mine, until a nurse called her back to the unit. When the surgeon finally came out, I stood too fast and had to grab the chair. He said the words slowly, because good doctors know families hear only every third one. She made it through. The next days would matter. Recovery would be careful. There would be restrictions, appointments, medicine schedules, things to watch. But June was still here. I did not collapse. I had expected maybe I would. Instead, I thanked him like he had handed me directions and walked back to my daughter with my hands shaking at my sides. June slept most of that day. When she woke, her voice was thin. Did Grandma know I was scared? The question did not accuse. That made it worse. I sat beside her and smoothed the blanket near her elbow. She knew you were at the hospital. June looked at me for a long time, long enough to understand what I had not said. Then she turned her face toward the window. Later, when she could sit up a little, she asked for a red marker. On the edge of a hospital menu, she drew a crooked cardinal with wings too big for its body. Under it, in careful, uneven letters, she wrote, "People who come are family." I folded that menu and put it in my bag. I knew I would need it someday. I did not use the hospital menu right away. For months, it stayed folded inside the back pocket of my work bag, soft at the creases from being carried everywhere. I carried it through follow-up appointments, pharmacy lines, insurance appeals, school conferences, and the long afternoons when June slept on the couch, while Silas and Bennett learned to be quieter than children should have to be. At first, I wrote only because I could not hold all of it inside my body. I wrote after the kids were asleep, at the same kitchen table where I used to fight other people's medical bills. Only now the case file was my own life. I wrote the dates, the calls, the unanswered messages, the church photo, the sentence Taryn left behind on my work voicemail. I wrote Harriet arriving in the rain. I wrote Nina setting down a sandwich at 3:18 inches the morning. I wrote June asking if her grandmother knew she had been scared. The title came last. The night nobody came. Nina read the first version, because she had earned the right to. She did not cry in front of me. She only took off her glasses, folded them carefully, and said, "People need to understand this kind of alone." She sent it, with my permission, to the hospital family newsletter. I thought maybe 20 parents would read it in waiting rooms and feel less crazy for being tired. Then Maribel Shaw, a retired editor who volunteered with the hospital's family advisory board, asked if she could help me shape it for a wider audience. She trimmed nothing that mattered. She only taught me where to breathe. By December of 2024, the essay had traveled farther than I ever meant for it to. A national patient advocacy site picked it up. Then a parenting magazine. Then people started sharing screenshots of the lines they recognized from their own lives. Mothers, fathers, adult daughters, people who knew what it meant to watch a message say read and still hear nothing. The hospital invited me to read from it at their winter donor evening. I almost said no until I saw the sponsor list. Elaine's church was on it. So I stood at a podium under soft white lights, while donors sat at round tables with folded napkins and name cards. My mother was near the front in a navy dress, smiling the way she smiled when she believed the room belonged to her. I did not raise my voice. I read the Times. I read the messages. I read her caption aloud. Behind me, on the screen, appeared her own words from that December afternoon. Family means showing up when people need you most. The room turned quiet in a way even pride could not survive. After the reading, nobody clapped right away. That was how I knew the truth had landed. Applause comes easily when people can keep a story at a safe distance, Silence means it has crossed the room and sat down at the table with them. I stepped away from the podium with my hands steady, which surprised me. For a whole year, I had imagined that saying those words out loud would break something in me. Instead, it felt like setting down a box I had carried too long. Not gently, not angrily. Just down. Elaine left before dessert. I saw her stand, saw the woman beside her lean in, as if asking whether she was all right, saw my mother smile with half her face and make for the side door. Stanley followed a few steps behind, not fast enough to look loyal, and not slow enough to look brave. By morning, people were calling it a misunderstanding. Not to me. They did not have that much courage, yet. But the church ladies had group texts of their own, and the story moved through them with the efficiency of prayer chain gossip. Someone asked why Elaine had never mentioned June's surgery. Someone else remembered the Christmas basket caption. Someone found the essay online and read the whole thing instead of the parts my mother wished existed. Then Evan Pike from the county paper called her for comment. I know, because he called me first, and asked if I wanted to respond before publication. That small courtesy told me he was better at family than half my relatives. The article ran 2 days later. It was not cruel. That made it worse for them. Cruelty can be dismissed. Facts have to be carried. Elaine Mercer, longtime coordinator of the church's holiday outreach, declined to address the specific timeline, but said, "There are two sides to every family story." That sentence did more damage than my essay ever could have done alone. The outreach committee asked Elaine to step back for the rest of the season. A woman who had once praised her servant's heart stopped sitting beside her at Bible study. Stanley lost 2 old insurance referrals in 1 week, not because anyone screamed at him, but because people remembered that a man who sells protection for a living had not protected his own granddaughter from being alone. Taryn deleted her cheerful comments from my essay page. Cole sent one stiff email about how public attention was affecting his work and whether we could be reasonable about support until things calmed down. I forwarded it to my attorney. For the first time, in a long time, the consequences were not mine to absorb. The knock came 6 days later, on Christmas Eve. By then, I had turned off notifications for almost everyone with my last name. The boys and June were in the living room, where Bennett was hanging ornaments too low and Silas was correcting him with the exhausted authority of an older brother. June was wrapped in her cardinal blanket, pale but stubborn, directing both of them from the couch. Harriet was in the kitchen pretending not to improve my cocoa recipe. For the first time in a year, the house felt like Christmas without asking permission. Then someone knocked. Not a delivery knock, not a neighbor knock, a careful, practiced knock, the kind people use when they want to sound humble from the other side of a door. I opened it and found them lined up beneath the porch light. Elaine first, holding a poinsettia like an offering. Stanley behind her, eyes on the welcome mat. Cole beside him in a dark coat, with Taryn at his shoulder holding a red gift bag she had probably bought on the way over. For a second, nobody spoke. They looked smaller than they had in my memory, but not softer. "Mara," my mother said. "We didn't want the holiday to pass like this." I stepped outside and pulled the door nearly closed behind me. I did not want June hearing her grandmother use Christmas as a bandage. Elaine's eyes filled on command. "We have all done a lot of thinking. What happened last year was painful for everyone." "For everyone," I repeated. She flinched, but kept going. "Families misunderstand each other, but we are still family. June needs grandparents, the boys need their father. And with everything being so public now, it would be healing for all of us if we could move forward together." There it was. Not June, not Silas, not Bennett, public. Cole cleared his throat. "I've been thinking I should see the boys regularly. It isn't right, me being cut off." I looked at him. "You were never cut off. You stopped coming." Taryn's smile tightened. "This has been hard on him too, Mara. On all of us. People are saying things." My mother leaned closer. "And if you write another piece, maybe this time you could include the good memories, the whole truth." The whole truth. From people who had spent a year hoping the truth stayed quiet. Then Cole added, almost casually, that his hours had been reduced since the article, and maybe we could be reasonable about support until things settled. That was when I understood why they had come. They were not knocking for forgiveness, they were knocking for access. I looked at the four of them standing there in the cold, waiting for me to become the version of myself they remembered. The one who explained, softened, absorbed, made room. The one who could be cornered with the word family, and trained to feel guilty for wanting less pain. That woman had spent a year in hospital chairs, pharmacy lines, attorney emails, and school pickup lanes. She had loved a frightened child through surgery. She had watched two little boys learn which adults came when called. She had written the truth with shaking hands until the shaking stopped. She was not on that porch anymore. Last year, I said, I asked for one night. Not money, not a miracle. One night. I needed my son safe while their sister was in cardiac ICU. Every one of you said no in your own way. Elaine's mouth tightened. That is not fair. No, I said. What happened to June was not fair. What happened after was a choice. Taryn looked away first. Cole stared past me toward the thin line of light inside the house. My father kept his eyes on the porch boards, and for 1 second, I thought maybe he would finally say something true. His lips parted. His face folded with the weight of whatever sentence had been living behind it. Then Elaine touched his sleeve. He closed his mouth. That hurt, but it did not surprise me anymore. My mother's voice sharpened. So you're going to keep punishing us? At Christmas? I'm not punishing you, I said. I wrote down what happened. If the truth humiliates you, that part belongs to you. The porch went quiet. Then I turned to Cole. You can discuss support with my attorney. You can discuss visitation when you are ready to be a father in private, not just a wounded man in public. His face flushed, but he said nothing. Taryn tried one last smile. Mara, we never meant. You meant enough, I said, and the rest is on page 114. I did not say it loudly. I did not need to. Finally, I looked back at my mother. You told me not to make my life yours, so I won't. You do not get the crisis, and you do not get the credit. Then I stepped inside and closed the door gently. No slam. A slam is for people who still need the house to hear them. In the living room, June looked up from the couch. Silas and Bennett were hanging a red cardinal ornament too high for any of them to reach, and Harriet was laughing in the kitchen, telling them to wait for a grown-up. I walked over, lifted Bennett so he could place it on the branch, and felt the room settle around us. That was family. Not blood, not apology, not Christmas words said too late. Family was who came when coming, cost something, and stayed long enough for the cocoa to cool. The lesson in Mara's story is not that family will always fail you. That would be too bitter, and life is more complicated than that. The real lesson is that love is not proven by blood, last names, holiday photos, or the words people know how to say when others are watching. Love is proven in the inconvenient moments. It is proven when the phone rings late, when the drive is long, when the answer costs time, comfort, money, or pride. Some people love the idea of family more than they love the work of being one. They want the picture, the credit, the warm seat at the table. But they do not want the hospital chair, the midnight call, the frightened child, the messy kitchen, or the responsibility that comes when someone says, I need help. And that is where life teaches us the hardest truth. Not everyone who belongs to your history deserves access to your future. Mara did not become cruel. She became clear. She learned that forgiveness does not mean handing the same people another chance to abandon you. She learned that peace sometimes sounds like a door closing gently. She learned that resilience is not pretending nothing hurt. It is taking what hurt you, naming it honestly, and refusing to let it decide the rest of your life. Family can be rebuilt. Sometimes it is a neighbor with cocoa. Sometimes it is a nurse with a sandwich. Sometimes it is a child's drawing folded inside a bag. Sometimes it is the people who show up quietly, without needing applause. So maybe the question is not, who is supposed to love me? Maybe the better question is, who actually shows up when love becomes inconvenient? If this story touched something in you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever learned who your real family was during a hard season? I would love to read your thoughts. And if you believe stories like this matter, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for the next story. Sometimes one quiet truth is enough to help someone feel less alone.